Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. My name is Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And I like to, stretch out the topics and stuff like that every once in a while. My primary focus is astrology. That's what I am. I'm an astrologer. If you are interested in astrology, and you should be, because it's an amazing tool to help you understand your life, the people in your life, how to get along with them, why you don't get along with them. All those characteristics are clearly evident in the astrology chart. I'm a professional astrologer. My website is www.turningofthewheel.com if you want to get a hold of me. That's how you can. But getting on to the subject for the day, today, we're going to be talking about the moon. Now, the moon is probably the second most important planet in the zodiac wheel. Now, we have all the planets all the way out to Pluto in the zodiac wheel, but some planets have more weight than others, and the moon is clearly one of those has more weight. It's considered to be the great mother, as opposed to the sun, which is seen as the great father. When we have the great mother in our charts, we understand our emotional wellspring. This is sort of the mother. The mother is the moon. The moon is the closest orb to us. Even though it's not a planet, it's considered to be sort of a satellite or a moon, literally, of the Earth. It still is a valid character in the astrology chart. When we talk about the astrology chart, we're talking about terms and attributes that are part of what makes an individual. When you're born, you are cast, and Carl Jung, the great psychologist, summarized it best. Individuals are like a grape on a vine, that when we are born at that moment in time, we have certain characteristics, just like a grape has what's called, certain terroir. The terroir in the world of grapes and vineyards is the earth, the air, the soil, the climate, the temperature. All of those things are attributes that make that grape a certain type of entity. That grape on one vine may be absolutely an award winner one year, and the next year may not be the same grape, even though it came from the same place and the year was pretty much the same. That change of season is the kind of model I want you to think of when you think of the attributes of the astrology and why it's important. So when we're talking about having this as being part of our quality, as part of who we are, it's important that we understand the placement of the moon in the astrology wheel. It's very important. If you know nothing else, if you only know your sun sign, it's important to know your moon sign. The moon in the chart is the second most important piece of your chart, if not the most important. Some people would argue it's the most, depends upon what their sign is. But the moon is an incredibly invaluable point. And when we talk about sun sign astrology, like you see in the newspapers, it just talks about one sign. If you know which sign the moon is at the time of your birth, and you put those two pieces together, you're going to get much more of an idea of what's going on with you in your life that week, or that day, or that year, or whatever time frame you're looking at. It's important to understand where that is in your chart. Now, the moon goes around the wheel about every 28 days, which is the equivalent of the cycle for the menses for the women, the menstruation cycle. It's the same cycle, which is again why it's attributed to the mother. And it's in each sign, each of the zodiacal signs, roughly about 2.5 days per sign. So, if you don't know when you were born, which is important for understanding the ascendant, at least if you know the day and where the moon was, then you're able to get that much more information. That you can get from a professional astrologer. You'd have to contact me or someone like myself to understand where that is, or you can find it out online if you have the right thing. That you can get with just your birth date and place, where the moon was in your chart. So the moon is a very critical piece in the astrology chart, and it indicates, as I said, our emotional wellspring. It sort of is how we express ourselves. It has a sense of character that is different than the sun sign. The sun sign is sort of our foundational moon. I think of our foundational core. I think of the moon more as the piece that sort of holds the house together, so to speak. It's that entity, that's that character of love. It's that emotional wellspring that holds us together and keeps us going. It also shows how we express ourselves, especially with regard to emotions. This is the realm of the moon. So each sign has characteristics, and when the moon is in that sign, the moon takes on those characteristics, and that's how you manifest your emotions. That's how you express yourself. Oftentimes, people will contact me for astrology readings, and they'll say, gosh, I'm having a terrible time with my husband or my wife, or what is it, why is it? And I'll look at their charts and I'll say, well, there's something here that is just not working, and it is perhaps the way that they are expressing themselves. Also, when we have a major presence of the moon, like a full moon or a new moon, or an eclipse of the moon or an eclipse of the sun, we will see those characteristics amplified or brought into a different framework at the time that they happen, especially with full moons. We all know about the full moon. As a matter of fact, another word for the word for moon is luna, and we think of lunatic when we think of the full moon. That's very much the case. So the moon has a real sense of draw to it, literally and figuratively. We know that it takes care of our tides, so we know that it has to have value. But the water is the great equalizer, and so the moon has that characteristic. It rules the sign Cancer, and Cancer is a water sign, so it has that sense of equanimity to it because it's the great equalizer. You bring water will always it'll always equal itself out no matter where it is. It's also one of the most powerful elements in the world. It's what we're made of. We're made of 98% water, or whatever the case is. It's a very, very important characteristic of who we are. So each of the signs manifests their emotions and their moons differently. We'll see the moon come across in many different ways. Different signs have a different way of expressing their emotions. It's very clear. And if you're not getting along with somebody, if you are getting along with someone, it's a very good reason for that would be how you act with your moons, how the moons act in your chart. Now the moon is also important because it has that sense of, it represents the mother. So we are a composite of the mother and a father. As I mentioned before, we are living in a dualistic, we live in dualistic worlds. We are a dualistic entity. Everything in our lives is based on a sense of polarity. And the moon is something that augments that as well. So when we look at the moon through the signs, we can see a great deal of energy, we can see a great deal of character. When we have the mathematical or the geometrical construct of the moon in relationship to the sun, we can understand sometimes why people are more complex than others. There may be a person who's very ambitious and aggressive, say in Aries, and they have a moon that is in a 90-degree angle to that planet, sun. That would create someone who has a conflict, who's always trying to work towards solving something, is always a little bit out of sorts. But by the same token, that person also has a very strong motivating character that goes with it. It's very much the case with the moon. The moon represents emotions, and emotions can be very, very volatile. They can be very warm. They have run the full gamut of human character, if you think about it. Everything that we represent and do and express in our lives is manifested by our emotions. This is how we laugh, we sing, we cry, we weep, we get angry. All those characteristics are part of it. So it's important to understand how that works. So I'm going to go through each of the signs, if the moon is in each of those signs, and you'll be able to understand them a little bit better. I'll give you some quick ideas. If you want more research on it, more information, I encourage you to visit my website, turningofthewheel.com. Just one long word, turningofthewheel.com, and it should be on the screen, and you'll be able to see that as well. I have a lot of information on there that will give you the ability to understand. If you're interested in astrology, I think once you get a little bit intrigued by it, you'll be fascinated by how the accuracy is there and what you can learn from it. It's a real Pandora's box of wonderful, tools and characteristics that are there at your request when you get there. Now, let's start out with Aries. The moon in Aries is just as Aries is. Aries is an impulsive, hot-headed, quick-thinking, action-oriented kind of person. So, how would you expect the moon to act in a situation like that? Well, let's see. Impulsive, they might be quick-thinking. They might act suddenly. They might get anger quickly. They do have that tendency, and Aries can get very angry very quickly, but they will also cool down very quickly. So they may flash and get angry and say something quickly and be impulsive, but then they'll just calm right down and boom, it'll be gone the same way. Very forgiving. An Aries may go to bed, an Aries moon may go to bed angry and wake up and be a totally different new person. So this is very much of a Aries-like quality. That sort of that fire energy is there. It's augmented by that. And the signs represent the characteristics of the planet that's there. So if the planet is there, such as the moon is in Aries, the moon is going to take on the Aries quality, the emotional qualities of Aries as an entity. So if you know what Aries is all about as a person, you'll know that when the moon is there, they're going to carry out that character, that same thing. Now we go on to Taurus. The moon in Taurus is very much like a Taurus as well. It has that same love of the luxury and the finer pieces of life. There's great quality there. But the moon in Taurus can also be incredibly stubborn, rigid in their opinions. And opinions are a way of manifesting your emotions. They can be very steadfast, very loyal, but there's that emotional underpinning there that says rigidity sometimes. And this is not a judgment. None of the things I say about any signs are judgmental. These are simply observations that have been culled over the years of astrological data, trying to figure out and put together how these things all work. And they do work very well. So a moon in Taurus is interesting because if a person has a moon in Taurus and they fall in love with a person who is a Taurus, their sun's in Taurus, there's going to be a natural bond. And I'll get into that a little bit further on. I want to keep continuing on with the signs though. So now we go on to Gemini. The moon in Gemini, very interesting. It's a quick thinking moon. It's a moon that can balance many different things in their heads. Oftentimes a Gemini moon will be able to process loads of information simultaneously. They'll be thinking about their income taxes on one part of their head. They'll be thinking about their daily plans in another part of their head. They'll be thinking about what they're going to have for dinner in the other part of their head. They'll be thinking about a future project. Very scattered, but able to keep all those things in the air. They're able to juggle many different emotions because that's the quality of the Gemini moon. It's an air quality, so it's very intellectually oriented. It's going to have that strong sense of intellectual, and that's that quick thinking mind that has that. But as a result, sometimes we see them to be a little bit superficial because they're so involved with their daily churn, their daily superficial thing. They have a difficult time getting into deeper. And that's not to say that they're not good at that, but they're very expressive when it comes to that. We move to the moon in Cancer. Now, the Cancer is the sign I said earlier that rules the moon, so it's a very strong place, and it's the sign of the mother. And the moon in Cancer is the expression of a individual through their home and their family. This is their nurturing area. This is where they find their wellspring of stability. This is where we see that the mother who's baking the fresh cookies and making the wonderful big dinners and has the house always warm and welcoming. It's a very strong maternal quality, especially when it's expressed emotionally. But by the same token, Cancer people who have a moon in Cancer can be very sensitive to criticism. So there's that sort of, you think of the crab. The crab is what is the sign, is the creature that represents the Cancer. So you think about a crab in the sea being approached by somebody. They stand back and they have their snappers and they get very scared and they sort of pull back into the rocks like that. That's very much what a Cancer moon is like. It's how a Cancer expresses themselves emotionally when the moon is in Cancer. When the moon is in Leo, watch out. You're going to get someone who comes in and has the same qualities as a Leo sun. The moon in Leo is a very powerful moon. It's it's a person who has the confidence to be able to come out and has emotional magnitude and charisma behind them. It's almost like they're a force of nature. They have this real strong emotional landscape a part of them. They live in a very emotional arena when they express the moon through the sign of Leo. It's very much of that. It's a creative quality, but it's also very much of a fixed quality. So the moon there might indicate somebody who is an opera singer. I know somebody who's a very well-known astrologer who is known throughout the world. He's got a Leo moon, and when he walks into the room, everybody pays attention to him. It's similar to the Leo sun, because the sun is the foundational, but the moon is how they represent themselves emotionally. When you know a person's emotional makeup, you're going to understand the way they act. Very simple. When we look at the Virgo moon, a moon in Virgo, the moon in Virgo is interesting because they're the ones who are the great nurturers of the zodiac wheel. They're the ones that love to take care of others. They're the ones that sort of sacrifice. They're the ones that bend and to help others. They're the ones that are pouring their heart out. They're the ones that put their time in hospitals and areas like that, trying to help other people. This is the real strong quality of the Virgo moon. It's that very strong ability to serve, to protect, to help, to have detail. But by the same token, the Virgo moon, a person with a Virgo moon can be very judgmental sometimes, a little bit critical. And so that can be a difficult thing to mitigate. They often soften it with their ability to give, so that many people forgive them for that. The next sign, Libra. A moon in Libra would indicate a person who has a very sort of intellectual, again, because Libra is an air sign, a very intellectual connection with their emotions. And they also represent and express themselves emotionally through the arts. Through the arts and through the ability to visualize. There's a strong visual component to the Libra. Libra has that wonderful way of expressing themselves, and it's a very deep, they're sort of very cognizant about the way they look and the way that they're presented. This is the moon in Libra. The sun in Libra can be very different. But the moon in Libra can be that sense of fashion, that sort of presentation. How do I look? They may be the ones that are always checking the mirror to make sure their hair is right and their clothes are right and everything is, their presentation is very critical. This is how they express themselves emotionally. But they're also the kind of sign, the moon is there, is the kind of sign that likes to express themselves intellectually through conversation. So they're the ones that like to talk about what's going on with them. They like to share their feelings. They like to speak about what that's going on. And they always have that sense of being able to understand both sides of the story. So emotionally, this is what we're talking about with the moon, because the moon represents our emotions. They have that ability to see both sides of the story, which is critical, because if you're in a situation where you're a parent and you're trying to figure out a problem with your children, you've got to be able to hear both sides of the story in order to come up with that sense of balance. Interesting character. The next sign is Scorpio. A Scorpio moon is a very intense moon. This is a person who has a deep passion, a deep sense of understanding the darker side of life sometimes. When we talk about astrology, as you know, we often use broad sweeping terms to sort of characterize an individual. But this is part of the fun of astrology, because you can customize those attributes to fit the individual person who you're speaking with or about. Very critical, very easy to do that. But here we have a person who's not afraid of the darker things in life, is sort of drawn to the mysterious underbelly of life, so to speak, sort of beneath the covers. They love that, and to have that investigative quality. And as a result of that, we see the strong characteristics for research, legal processes. Again, there's that fascination with sex and death. That's sort of a classic contribution to what the Scorpio moon might look like. We also see that with people who have Scorpio suns, but that's sort of been overplayed in some ways, because a lot of people have strong drives in those areas. It's not necessarily they don't own the corner in that market, so to speak. But we do see that sense of intensity, and oftentimes we find the emotions in a Scorpio are going to be those, especially in a relationship, of loyalty. We'll find loyalty is one of the strongest characteristics of a Scorpio. If they're there for you, they're there for life. And the very endearing quality, if you have a friend who's a Scorpio, you know that they will always have your back. So that's something to consider. Next, we move to Sagittarius. The moon in Sagittarius is very similar to the sun in Sagittarius. And of course, all the signs have that quality. But what we see is the sun in Sagittarius, we see that sort of longing to be moving. There's that wanderlust, that sense of almost detachment in some way, although detachment sounds a little bit too harsh in some ways. But it's that sense of aloofness. There's a sense of wanderlust. That's a sense of adventure, the ability to learn and move and beyond and go beyond. So they're not always firmly planted in the ground. They like to sort of be, it's kind of like if you love something, set them free, you need to set the Sagittarius moon free, because they love to go off and and wander in that regard. So it's very, very much the case in that regard. After Sagittarius, we have Capricorn. Capricorn, as you know, when I was just talking about the signs, has a different quality. A Capricorn moon is a very pragmatic person. They're a person who probably will wear their emotions very close to their sleeve. They will approach each of their emotions and their emotional encounters very pragmatically. There'll be a sense of ethics involved with what they do. They want to do the right thing. So they will emote and express themselves through that character. They will do the right thing in that regard. So doing the right thing is sort of a moral obligation, an ethical quality that they have. It's that strong sense of, sort of making sure the lights are out and that the bills are paid. And that's how they express themselves emotionally. Very interesting character, especially in the Capricorn. When we move to the Aquarius moon, the Aquarius moon is very much like, of course, all of the signs have their characteristics, but this is how we're expressing. The moon, don't forget, is how we express our emotions. This is our emotional wellspring. So this is the platform, or the filter, rather, through which we express our emotions. And how we express our emotions is how we interact with others. So it's a very critical piece of who the person is. An Aquarius moon is a moon that can be somewhat detached sometimes, a little bit chilly, a little bit hard to penetrate, because again, their emotions are more not easily revealed. They are sort of subdued and held close at hand. They don't express themselves quite so clearly. And if they do, they express themselves in a way that would be more in line with how the world is. What will my emotions bring to the greater good of the community or the group in which they're in? So they're group players in that regard, and they have that sense of ability to be able to fit in and do what's right for the group. They're very globally group-oriented. They're not quite so self-centered. But when you're expressing your emotions and you're an Aquarius, you're probably going to have very strong opinions. When we look at people who have those kinds of characteristics, we're going to be able to see a certain depth of character, but we're also going to see a rigidity in how they express their emotions. So, for example, getting into an argument with an Aquarius moon, they're probably going to make sure that they win the argument, or at least they will be less likely to give up on their end when it comes to that. The final sign that we're going to talk about with the moon is the moon in Pisces. Now, the moon in Pisces is an interesting place because they can be very emotional, they can be very aloof, they can be very distant, they can be very lost in a world of daydreams, much the way the Pisces sun is. But when they express their emotions this way, we would see something quite different. We'd see a certain sense of depth, a tenderness, it would be another good word for it. And many people might not see that tenderness as being a masculine quality, perhaps, but there are men who have Pisces moons, and they may be people who go on to become artists, or the great poets, or the great mystics, or the great spiritual seekers. All may have a strong characteristic with regard to the moon, and especially a Pisces moon, because Pisces has that certain loftiness, that certain ambiguity, that certain sense of self that is sort of lost in the clouds, but still very potent and very prominent in who they are as an individual. It's an interesting sign, and it's an interesting characteristic. And when you get into, and again, all the definitions I'm giving here are very broad-based and broad-stroked, and they're meant to be that way so that, because the individual person, like you yourself, when you have your chart done, I would get into the granularity of what that chart was all about. And I'd be able to sort of what we call synthesize all the characteristics of the chart into a composite of who you were. As I mentioned in other shows, we are a composite of all the signs. We have pieces of our life are occupied by each of the signs. So if you're having an eclipse in your relationship house, for example, that part of your life, that's going to impact your relationship in some way, good or bad. There's no judgment which way. Many characteristics happen in ways which are far different than we expect. Oftentimes astrology, and people who follow astrology, are those people who approach me sometimes, always get very fearful when they hear the word eclipse or the moon or the full moon. Oh my gosh, full moon, blah, blah, blah. Granted, there are more occasions when people are upset on those days of the year, the full moons. We do see that, and it depends upon the sign and how it impacts you individually. You may have more of an impact on that day. You may be feeling it more emotionally. but it doesn't mean that it's going to be the end of the world. And that's one of the major misconceptions about astrology that I hope to dispel. When we think of astrology, we have to think of it as an early form of psychology, as I mentioned earlier. It has to be seen as a foundational tool for allowing us to understand and integrate and homogenize with other people. That's the best way. You want to be able to integrate and homogenize, or at least understand why you work with some people and why you don't work with some people. It's very critical to understand that. And it's an interesting piece of how we are in regard to our characters. And when we understand that piece of our emotional wellspring, we know how to adapt a person. Now, if you're in a relationship and you know somebody is a sensitive person, supposing you're involved in a relationship with somebody who has a Cancer moon, you're not going to pick on them because they're going to be hypersensitive to that sort of ability because they have that very deep sensitivity. Knowing the moon of these people, of the people in your life, gives you an enormous amount of insight into how to handle them, how best to get along with them. This is one of the joys of astrology, is allowing for tolerance, allowing for understanding, acceptance. All these words are critical, and they all are byproducts of a deeper understanding of what astrology does and can bring to you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and if you've been following me for a while, you know I've done different shows on different characteristics of the astrology area. I've mentioned the ascendant, I've mentioned the sun in other segments. The moon, as I said, it represents our core emotions. It's our core emotions, it's sort of our bedrock, it's the mother within us. Each of us has, we're a composite. As Carl Jung said, we are the anima and the animus, the male and the female. We all have a feminine quality, we all have a masculine quality. These are all part of us. Again, there's that duality. There's this duality of character as we see in all of ourselves. It's that sense of being able to understand this sense of duality. This is sort of like, and we see it in our lives. We see the day, we see the night, we see the good, we see the bad, we see the sun, we see the rain. All of those dichotomies are part of what makes up the panoply of the zodiac in the world. And when you understand that, now what's most important, and an astrologer can tell you this and I can tell you this, my website is www.turningofthewheel.com. If you email me or contact me and you want to know where your sun and your moon are in your chart, or where your sun and your moon are in your husband or your wife's chart, it'll give you a great deal of understanding about how they are as individuals, how complicated they are, how easy they are to get along. All those characteristics are all part and parcel of the moon. The moon is the great mother. It is the second most important, and many people would argue it's the most important piece of who we are physically and emotionally. It's our emotional bedrock, and it's critical to understand that. When you know that, you'll find your relationships work. If you're a certain kind of sign, you want a person to come to you who has a moon in that sign. It's a wonderful way to connect. It's a very critical piece of who we are, and understanding that when it comes to matchmaking, finding love, critical. I thank you all for watching today. My website is www.turningofthewheel.com. You should be able to see that on the screen. If you have questions about astrology, contact me. I can help you. It's an amazing tool, and I'll talk to you all soon.